Hello, we are on the brink of potentially the last fair American election. If you are American and eligible to vote, make sure you check your voter registration and get out there and vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, people who actually believe that your life is worth supporting. Harris believes in affordable housing, restoring Roe v. Wade, and battling climate change. Trump believes that immigrants are eating your pets.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Okay, Grandpa, let's get you to bed. Do the reasonable thing. Support sanity. Now onto this. It's the Apothecary Diaries video. Pick your poison, drink your poison. Good poison. Also known as the Pharmacist's Monologue and Drugstore Soliloquy, the Apothecary Diaries is a show about girls doing girly things like politics, science, detective. It's about women, written by women, and yet it's watched by dudes? If you look at the breakdown of Apothecary Diaries viewers by gender, which I used my special YouTuber powers and connections to do, 41% of Apothecary Diaries viewers in the English-speaking world identify as dudes. Thank you to Miles Atherton at Whitebox Entertainment for that number. And that was astonishing to me. Not because the numbers themselves are surprising, they're pretty much exactly what I expected them to be, but because a series that is so heavily focused on social dynamics that primarily, if not exclusively, affect women could have such a significant male audience, with the anime community being so famously, receptive to feminist discourse. But something about Apothecary Diaries is different. Guys like this show. Guys will sit through 20 minutes of an episode of anime telling them that, hey, women actually have problems in the world and be cool with that. So what makes Apothecary Diaries so different compared to other shows that try to do this? Honestly, it's a lot of things, and I'm not going to be able to get to all of them even in this incredibly long video, so I'm mostly going to skip the obvious stuff like it's a mystery show instead of a romance and focus on things that I found the most interesting. And I had just one more thing to clarify before we really begin. I just want to make clear that the fact that the Apothecary Diaries does appeal more or less equally to male and female audiences isn't inherently virtuous or something that absolutely any series should strive for. There are certainly wonderful shows that want to speak directly to a certain group of people, and being focused on appealing to a small and specific demographic is usually a much better plan for creating a story that resonates strongly with its intended audience than trying to appeal to a broad range of folks. Ouran hasn't done anything wrong just because only 25% of its viewers are male, and Konosuba hasn't done anything wrong just because only 1 in 10 of its viewers are female. What I find impressive and praiseworthy about the Apothecary Diaries is the fact that it specifically takes a highly female-focused story and makes it appealing to male audiences, and that, I think, is worth talking about. First, let's establish what I mean by feminist discourse. This would be any plot point, bit of dialogue, or general vibe that seeks to inform the audience about the lived experiences of women, queer women. For the Apothecary Diaries, this would largely focus on autonomy, lack of social mobility, general disenfranchisement, gender essentialism, and sexual assault or abuse. Speaking as a male anime fan, these are not generally the kinds of things that male anime fans want to hear about in their cartoons, but it's especially important that we do. Because no matter how loudly an oppressed minority screams that they're being treated unfairly, nothing is going to change unless the oppressing majority listens to their concerns and changes their behavior. To me, that 50-41-8 split in viewership is an indication that this series is able to present its messaging in a way that resonates with women without pandering to women, and also without being off-putting to men, and that's an insanely impressive and important thing to do. So how exactly does the Apothecary Diaries manage to present such vital female-facing topics to a largely male audience without having my kin turn their oh-so-masculine noses up at the screen and say, ew, women, I hate that? And the best way to begin that conversation is by talking about a different show entirely. Snow White with the Red Hair is an anime from 2015 about a small-town apothecary who is kidnapped and taken to be the concubine of a local monarch. She then catches the eye of a high-ranking government official and gets to live out her days as a court herbalist. I don't have the numbers on this one, but I am very comfortable saying that Snow White with the Red Hair is not a show made with dudes in mind. In addition to being labeled a shoujo on every website that gives even the barest description of it, it has heavy focus on romance, major mid-2010s girl power vibes, and a plethora of pretty boys to take the main character into their arms and just hold her for a while. And despite all of the superficial similarities between this show and Apothecary Diaries, the presentation of their feminist leanings could not be more different, and it might be surprising to learn exactly how that is. Most importantly, Shirayuki is a very active and opinionated protagonist. This is the kind of girl who makes things happen, and who is willing to speak out against injustice whenever she sees it, whether it directly affects her or not. In fact, the opening lines of the first 3 episodes of the show all involve her explicitly telling the viewer that she is going to make her own path for herself, no matter what anybody else thinks about it. And she yells at the prince of her country because he's trying to steal women, and stealing women is wrong. She is an icon of self-determination who also has the option to fall into the arms of a powerful man who loves her and just be small for a little while, because sometimes you need that, okay? Don't judge. It is a show written for and attempting to appeal to women, specifically young women. I'm thinking the 14 to 17 range, and that is not a bad thing. Shows that are very explicit about the importance of female autonomy are important. They're important for everyone, but they are especially important for women in that age group who need to have role models in their lives explicitly espousing those values. You cannot get to the point where you understand all the intricacies of intersectionality and internalized misogyny and other complicated gender studies words if you don't first understand girl good. But that kind of direct on-the-nose messaging simply is not going to fly if you're trying to get your point across with men. Men do not want to hear girl good. Not because we don't think girl good, not usually because we don't think girl good, but because on a very base level there are 2 fundamental reactions to that kind of basic feminist rhetoric. For men who have the, let's generously say, misguided belief that feminism has served its purpose and that the social standing of women is equal to or even superior to that of men, hearing a girl say girl good comes across as confrontational. They see a woman on screen shouting her piece at a powerful man, and that reads to them as a group who has already won their battles, already carved out their piece of the social pie, milking this idea of misogyny and inequality in order to levy their historical victimhood into modern-day sympathy and even greater social standing that they will eventually use to oppress men the same way men used to oppress women but don't anymore. To be clear, this is obviously absurd, but if a show wants to get this kind of message across to men, like I allege the Apothecary Diaries does, it has to remember that this is how men think. That a good portion of men believe that women have all the rights they need, and that any modern talk of inequality is just the bitching of eternal martyrs, phrase used advisedly. But this is not just an issue with those men. Hello, I had the second of the 2 reactions that we're talking about today, and that reaction was slowly expelling all of the air from my lungs and doing my level best not to feel like a 4th grader being lectured to. Most people these days who pay attention to anything understand that women have issues. Feminist messaging is not fundamentally different than any other kind of messaging in media, and media that goes out of its way to explicitly state what it wants the audience to get out of it is intellectually insulting. It's like if The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe had a scene near the end where someone stood up with a megaphone and said, "And the lion was Jesus." Like, yeah, buddy, we know. There's a scene in Snow White with the Red Hair where Shirayuki dramatically cuts off the eponymous red hair because that's the thing that drew the eye of the prince who just wants to make her his sex puppet. And then she holds the lock of hair and whispers, "Just so you know, this isn't your fault." Which is basically yelling at the screen, hey guys, listen, I know that I just destroyed a symbol of femininity as a means of freeing myself from patriarchy, but just so everyone is clear, the femininity itself is not the problem. Rightfully, I should be able to wear my hair however I want, and it is only because of the unjust influence of powerful men that I am having to resort to these drastic measures now. Tragic. And I know that I'm bad, and I know that your point isn't that I personally am bad, but rather that I am by default a participant in problematic social constructs and have a social responsibility to act and speak against those constructs, but human brain is not wired to think in those terms, and it feels like you're saying I'm bad. Every one of these scenes feels like an explicit call-out, and that works on exactly one kind of man. The man who understands the point you're trying to make already. Some men are going to hear Shirayuki say something like this, and they're going to think that you are only saying that men literally believe it is is okay to kidnap women, and there are like 2 men who actually think it's okay to kidnap women, so they roll their eyes and think that you're getting hysterical, word used advisedly, about a complete non-issue. Most men will understand that the kidnapping thing is a microcosm of the much larger issue of patriarchal dominance, but they won't see themselves as part of that problem, because they aren't metaphorically kidnapping women. They think women can do anything they set their minds to. They're even voting for Kamala Harris as any normal person would. And it's kind of insulting for you to think, show, that they need to hear this lecture. Or that any man does, for that matter. Because surely everyone understands the most basic principles of feminism, right? And then there's the tiny sliver of men who actually do come close to understanding exactly how complicated and ongoing this issue is, and who still have that instinctual don't call me a bad person reaction, by the way, and they just get bored. And in this case, that's fine, because this show is speaking to teenage girls, and I'm only watching it because it's my job. But if it were speaking to men, it would be doing a very bad job, and I hope that makes sense. And now, 2,000 words into this script, let's talk about
the Apothecary Diaries.
When it comes to the Apothecary Diaries and its strategy for luring in and keeping male viewers, I think that its #1 asset is Mao Mao as a protagonist. There are many things about Mao Mao that I think work to keep her interesting to male viewers in a way that female leads in similar shows are not. To start with the small stuff, Mao Mao shows little to no interest in romance, and she actively turns up her nose at Jinshi's various attempts to prove that no one is immune to his ethereal androgynous beauty. Second, Mao Mao values the science of pharmaceuticals over the work of being a medical care provider. While she and Shirayuki are both women working in medicine, Shirayuki primarily sees making medicine as a means of helping people, while Mao Mao sees helping people as a byproduct of getting to play with drugs. Shirayuki is a nurse, and Mao Mao is a pharmaceutical engineer. Again, I have no numbers on this, so let me know if you do, especially if I'm wrong. But my gut and 30 years of living in a society tell me that men are significantly less interested in romance and in shows that feature passionately empathetic protagonists than women are. But as I said before, those are not things I want to dive particularly deep into in this video. The most important aspect of Mao Mao as a protagonist, as I see it, is that she is passive. Mao Mao is exactly the kind of character that your creative writing professor told you never to write. She is not a mover and shaker in the way that Shirayuki is. She just accepts things, letting them roll over her and doing her absolute best to keep her nose out of any sticky situations, even while her feet autonomously guide her toward the stick. When it comes to social structures, she tends not to have very strong opinions and almost always keeps her thoughts to herself on the rare occasions when she could make some kind of snarky quip. Even when literal babies are dying, Mao Mao would rather act within the constraints of her social rank, which is largely a function of her gender, and send coded window flower messages to other women than speak to anyone who actually has the authority to fix the situation. Meanwhile, Shirayuki would be running up the steps of the Imperial Palace yelling to any guard who stands in her way that woman she may be, but she's a damn good apothecary, and if they don't want the crown prince to choke to death on his own thick spittle, they'll let her see her patient this instant, damn it! And if you're one of those people who are currently thinking to yourself, well, of course Mao Mao would never do that, she'll get her head chopped off for insolence. That's right! And that's important, because it clearly frames Mao Mao's passivity as a direct result of her oppression. Earlier, we talked about Shirayuki's vociferousness acting as a deterrent for getting men to listen to what she has to say, and the obvious solution to that is to get her to say less. But how can you do that without sacrificing the point you're trying to make? Especially when part of that point is the fact that women are not in a position to be able to speak their minds to powerful men. You do it by making the lack of commentary demonstrate the point. Mao Mao isn't just silent about the world around her. She's silent because of the world around her. Show don't tell is basic writing advice, and it's advice that the Apothecary Diaries takes to heart. Yes, Mao Mao will occasionally have some unkind thoughts about being forced to work under an incompetent doctor who barely knows a metacarpal from a Gyarados. But we never see her rant about how hard she's worked, and how rough it is for women in medicine, and how much she wishes the mean old man in charge would just listen to her and give her the job she deserves. Creating a situation where Mao Mao could not reasonably say these things, even if she did think them, is fantastic writing. It avoids the problem of turning potential viewers off with lecture-based dialogue, while further demonstrating how oppressive majorities tend to actually exert their power over people. It isn't that oppressed people speak up and are beaten down, and it certainly isn't just that oppressed people are just waiting for one brave soul to be willing to say what everyone is already thinking. It's that the implied threat of violence that comes with a deeply entrenched power structure prevents most people from speaking out at all, or even from having the thought that speaking out might be beneficial to them. If Mau Mau were to raise a stink about not being given the opportunities that her talents should rightly afford her, the odor-eliminating spray of governmental domination will immediately be employed to ensure that the rear palace remains fresh-scented and orderly. Mau Mau knows that, and so she does not smell. But that's not to say that Mau Mau never says anything subversive at all. She just doesn't tend to view it as subversion so much as speaking plainly about the reality of her lived experience. Whenever I think about feminism in the Apothecary Diaries, this is the scene that always comes to mind for me. Take a look.
Cosmetics aren't always for making a face more beautiful.
I don't think I understand.
Then let me explain. It's to prevent being dragged into a back alley. I lived near the brothels, but not every man left satisfied. Some had empty wallets, violent tendencies, and diseases. A short, skinny, ugly girl rarely becomes a target.
Were you ever harmed?
Attempts were made, but instead, I was kidnapped. In this case, my makeup had faded, and they seemed to think that I was borderline marketable.
I'm so sorry. If only we could have policed them better.
I don't particularly mind now. A buyer can't tell if you were kidnapped or just sold off legally. They can't tell, and they really don't care.
Doesn't that make you angry?
Of course it makes me angry. But it's not your fault, and what can I do at this moment?
This scene in episode 5 is the first time that the viewer is confronted with the reality of sexual assault in this society, and I want you to think about how easy it would have been for that not to be the case. We know that this is a world in which sexual assault is common. Our protagonist just said that she has to take specific precautions to hopefully prevent it happening to her, and I can't imagine that she's the only woman who thinks like that when it's such a common sentiment in our modern-day society. Very nearly every female character we see in this series is either a prostitute, a former prostitute, or the literal property of the Emperor himself, expected to submit to his whims at the drop of a hat. And yet, this series goes out of its way to show the viewer the glitz and glamour of a sex worker's life. We don't spend any time with average streetwalking prostitutes until we do. We see the lives of the 3 princesses of the Verdigris house and Feng Shen, the incomparable courtesan prodigy. We don't see the nameless concubines who spend every night in the rear palace wondering if the Emperor is going to be craving them tonight. We see the 4 consorts who have lavish parties thrown in their honor, wear beautiful robes, and live in houses named after gemstones. Why? In a series that obviously cares about making people understand the plight of women, why don't they ever show us what happens when women walk around town unaccompanied? Why does the Emperor never call on a consort on screen? Even Mau Mau's kidnapping is cartoonish, with her being slung over a guy's shoulder like a bag of comedy oranges. Why? Because the problem with society, both in the Apothecary Diaries and in real life, is not that all men are rapists, and the series doesn't want to imply that it is. Depending on how the question of sexual assault is handled in a series, men generally react in one of 2 ways. Either we feel like the series is saying that men are inherently violent, in which case you have lost your male viewership, or we take the scene at face value and we say, oh, what a horrible thing that women have to deal with. But I am not a rapist, and therefore I am not part of the problem. The idea of someone thinking like that might sound strange and dismissive to those of us who are actively seeking out video essays about feminist cartoons in our spare time, but I assure you it's true. Most men, rightly, recognize that they are nothing like the people who kidnapped Mau Mau at the beginning of this story. They, rightly, think that they are more like Jinshi. They're horrified at the thought of something like that happening to someone they care about. They're sympathetic. They want to take action to change it. Problem is that they wrongly believe that the issues that women face in society begin and end with this kind of person, when, in actual fact, it lies much more squarely on the shoulders of people like Jinshi. Jinshi is not a bad man. Jinshi does not consider himself to be a bad man. He hears a woman say that women face serious problems directly at the hands of other men, and he doesn't laugh like a supervillain and flaunt his power in her face. He tears up. He wants to help. But he is so far divorced from the real issue at hand that he thinks the best way to solve rapes in the pleasure district is to send more powerful armed men to the pleasure district, and that is just not going to work out the way you want it to, my dude. The core of this issue ultimately is not that there are men wandering around the slums of your city kidnapping women to sell to the palace. The core of the issue is that the palace has created a society wherein it is profitable to kidnap and sell women, wherein women can legally be press-ganged into sex work. Presenting a viewer with a faceless enemy who is obviously bad does not provoke thought. Very few men are going to look at the rapist from the beginning of Psycho-Pass or the goblins in Goblin Slayer and do any serious self-reflection. Why would they? They are nothing like those people. But someone like Jinshi, a person with some very clearly good qualities who wants to make things better, if only for the people he cares about, a man can see himself in a character like that. And when that character does some harmless flirting here and there, or he wants a girl to make him an aphrodisiac as a joke, or he uses his authority to make her suck honey off his fingers, and sure, she complains, but it's all in good fun. A man can see himself in that too. And that is how you get people to start asking important questions of themselves. That's why it's important that the Emperor himself is seemingly a good man, by Emperor standards. This is the literal physical embodiment of a patriarchal society, a single man whose word is unquestioned and who can create the world that he wants to have exist. And nobody has a bad word to say about him. None of his eunuchs hold a grudge. None of the consorts seem to be at all perturbed about their job in the palace. Even Li Shu's apprehension is depicted in this very anime comedic reaction gif. If he spent the series running around giving tyrannical orders, putting his hands on anyone he wanted, and flaunting his power, a male viewer could easily look at that and say, that's not me. Instead, we see the man who refuses to have sex with Li Shu because, like the vast majority of men, he finds that idea disgusting. We see the man who keeps Aduo in his court when she can no longer have children because he appreciates her friendship and values her counsel. And that allows the reality of both of these situations to sink in a lot more deeply than it would if the series were more explicit about the fact that the Emperor has the legal right to rape this child whenever he wants, and the only reason it isn't happening is because the amount that he wants it happens to be zero. It invites the viewer to think about the implications of a society where powerful women can be thrown out of their homes if they aren't able to produce children, if they aren't able to appeal to the right man in the right ways. And that invitation to thought is far more accessible and far more valuable than just telling the viewer that rape is bad. But to me, the number one most interesting aspect of Drugstore Soliloquy's feminist messaging is the way that it shows how patriarchal society is bad for men. There are several smaller ways that the series does this, such as the military officer who loves concubine Fuyo not being able to be with her because she is the literal property of the Emperor, and a couple of instances of women fighting back against men by trying to kill them, because that's what happens when people are left with no legal means of recourse. And there's the somewhat on-the-nose metaphor of Lady Li Hua's son, the Crown Prince, the literal embodiment of a patriarchal society, dying because Mao Mao doesn't have the power to just tell people what she knows about the cause of this prince's illness, and instead has to resort to hoping that powerful women will listen to a coded window flower message. But there's one example of patriarchy being bad for men in the Apothecary Diaries that is far more engrossing than any of these, and that is the story of Lacan and Feng Qian. Feng Qian is a courtesan, a well-trained, well-educated, high-class sex worker, the property of the Verdigris house, able to be rented and sold however the matron decides would best line her own pockets, and Lacan found her irresistible. But it was not her beauty that drew Lacan to her. It was her ability to beat him in Go and Shogi, to talk well into the night about any manner of subjects. Feng Qian appealed to Lacan because she was the rare kind of woman he could consider an intellectual equal or even superior. Feng Qian is unique due to her education and intellect, and she is unique in her education and intellect because she lives in a society that does not prize women being educated and intellectual. We see this in the Emperor's own consorts, where they can be charming, talented, and intelligent, where they can be close friends and trusted advisors of the Emperor, but where they will still be seen as useless if they are unable to bear children, with Mao Mao at one point saying this: A society that doesn't value autonomy in women is a society wherein autonomous women are rare. And that kind of society, in addition to being bad for women, for very obvious reasons, leaves straight men like Lacan in a position where true romantic companionship is difficult to find, forcing them either to forego romance entirely or to settle for less. Putting in that sort of selfish, sort of misogynistic angle on why patriarchy is bad is devilish, because it makes things personal for the exact kind of viewer who normally would not see this as something that they have to deal with at all in their lives. And once that idea has wormed its way into a person's head, it's a very small step to make to realize that having half as many educated and capable people in society is not just bad for my love life, it's bad for everyone. Due to Function's scarcity and growing demand for the rare product that she is, simple economics dictates that it's going to cost a whole lot of money to purchase her. Money that Lacan doesn't have. She concocts a scheme to make sure that the two of them can be together that goes horribly wrong, and then Function becomes a syphilitic invalid. Lacan becomes a pariah with no friends. And we're all left thinking, gee, this sure would have worked out better in a society where women are allowed to just be with the people they want to be with instead of... Before the end of this video, I do want to talk briefly about the issue of classism, because I think a lot of people will look at many of the arguments I brought up here and think that they're issues of class and not of gender. That Mao Mao isn't able to be taken seriously not because she's a woman, but because she's poor and has no political connections. Jinshi doesn't have out-of-touch ideas on how to fix crime in the Pleasure District because he's a man, it's because he's rich and doesn't have any lived experience with these problems. This is all true, and I think that many of the points I've raised here are equally applicable to class-based issues as they are to gender-based ones. However, I remind anyone who's been having these thoughts that class is a function of gender. Jinshi is only allowed to have the influence he does because he is a man. Lady Gyokyo would not be in the position she's in if she weren't politically connected to at least one powerful man. The only seemingly self-made woman in the series is the matron of the Verdigris house, who achieved her position by literally selling other women to the dominant sex in a classic case of pick-meism. So yes, it's true that Mao Mao doesn't have as much influence as she ought because she's a literal slave, but she is only a literal slave because she happens to be of the sex that it is legal to enslave. And so, after 4,500 words in my longest ever video by word count, we come to the end of our discussion on how the Apothecary Diaries manages to appeal to men without sacrificing its ability to propagate a strong feminist message. Again, while a series obviously has no obligation to appeal to a wide demographic, I think that what Apothecary Diaries has done here is both very difficult and very impressive, and I wanted to shine a spotlight on it. Hopefully the rest of you appreciated that as much as I did. If you truly want to show your appreciation while getting cool stuff for yourself, you can go to patreon.com/explanationpoint to find out how. During our monthly anime club last month, I decided to challenge myself by spending 3 hours defending Arrow Manga Sensei, which was a hoot, even though my mouth hasn't tasted quite right since then. So if you want to be part of that kind of nonsense, you should join our anime club. Or just join our Patreon exclusive Discord, where you can talk with fellow anime fans about how every single number crunching show of the summer 24 season sucked except Bye Bye Earth. If you do, you can get your name on this list of people whom I greatly appreciate, and if you don't, that's okay. Next video is going to be a review of the first season of Kaiju number 8, which just barely managed to show that democracy is worth believing in by squeaking by I was reincarnated as the 7th prince so I can take my time perfecting my magical ability. Reminder that all patrons of all tiers get a single vote in deciding which anime they want reviewed, so if you want to have a say in that, go to patreon.com/explanationpoint and donate literally any amount of dollars. Doing so puts you in the running to be today's lucky patron, like Zebra Von Claw, an $8 patron who's been supporting the channel for nearly 5 years, and yet I never see you at Anime Club or weekly hangouts. Why is that? Thank you all for watching this one. Like, comment, subscribe, bell, other YouTube words, and until next time, this has been Explanation Point, signing out.
Now!